Tested advice on raising happy, independent boys. A conversation with author Susie Shaw. Hi there, I'm Cheryl Bond, and you are listening to the Mothers of Boys Survival Guide podcast. Motherhood is tough, and this is a place where we get real about parenting and talk about all of it, from infancy through adulthood. This podcast is inspired by the book Mothers of Boys Survival Guide. And today, we are going to hear from the author and co-host, Susie Shaw, with tips and strategies directly from her book for tackling some of the most difficult issues of motherhood. Hey, Suze.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for joining me on this adventure of the whole Mothers of Boys. The mob is what we call the Mothers of Boys, and the podcast is an important element of it.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to do it because I have 4 children, and I think when you're raising your kids, there are so many challenges and so many things that sometimes don't get talked about. So I think the more that we talk about all the issues and we're honest about them and we keep it real, the more that we can help each other and the other moms in the mob community.
I couldn't agree more, and
Yeah.
I do feel that community is so important.
Yeah, just supporting each other and learning from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, Suze, your book is wonderful. It's got so much in it. You break it down in a way that's very easy to just pick up if you're having one issue. Doesn't matter what the age is. It's, from infancy through adulthood. There's a certain issue, you can easily just pick it up and look at a section. There's illustrations, and it's just very, it's like a great resource book with lots of fun stories. How did that come about where you broke it up that way?
I wrote something that I wished I had when I was raising my 2 boys.
Mhm.
And I knew how tired I was at the end of every single day. And so the chapters and the information are really bite size. They're not incredibly long. You can feel as though you've accomplished something
Mhm.
within a short little evening of reading. And there's also tips from me, and then tips from what I call Sister Sense, and Sister Sense are from my sister-in-laws, and I have 8 sister-in-laws, and then my sister friends. So I would got a lot of advice, which I don't think everybody has that advantage when they're trying to raise kids. I call the boys in the story Ernest and Exuberance. I don't use their real names because I feel like when you have more than one child, they sort of get these personalities. And the older child, my older son, is Ernest, and a quieter child, and then Exuberance, who we also called sometimes Me Too, because he was so determined to do everything his older brother did. Is
Yeah.
Exuberance, and was very, very busy and had a ton of energy.
Mhm. Particularly when they're close in age. I think that second one tends to really emulate the other one.
Right.
Suze, when did you decide to write the book?
I have been collecting stories really even before I was married. I
Mhm.
would send out a Christmas letter on April Fool's Day because I never had time at Christmas time. And it was a
Mhm.
very funny, sarcastic newsletter. And then when I got married and the kids came along, everybody had their own little, couple of paragraphs in my funny newsletter. So I really started after COVID writing the book, and for inspiration, I looked through those older newsletters to remember a lot of the stories.
I think it's funny that your newsletters included not just the highlights. We tend to send out notes and little things on cards about all the highlights and accomplishments of the family. And I think it's really funny that you included the mishaps too. So
Well, I've been called a WYSIWYG, which is what you see is what you get,
Yeah.
and and that's just my personality.
Yeah.
But I do feel as though, especially at this time in our culture, we have a culture with social media and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok where things are sugar coated, and
Yeah.
it appears as though people are having no issues at all raising their kids, and they're doing these fabulous things, and it's just not accurate. And I think it's hurtful to the mob and to motherhood to think that that's the way it works. It is a roller coaster of a ride of up and down,
Yeah.
and you know that as well as I do.
Right. Yeah. And typically everybody's going through something difficult at some point. And usually it's, one thing I've always learned too, and my advice would be don't ever judge an age of a child that your child hasn't been at yet. You
Hmm.
know, there's a lot of people that have an infant and then they'll judge someone and how they're disciplining their toddler or their middle schooler or see something and you think, no, no, yep, sorry, you can't go there yet. You have no idea what that stage is like. Which your stages in your book, you break down the different stages, which is also makes it very easy to read. What are those? How did you come up with those titles, and what are those different stages that you break down?
Well, the very early stage, up until about 3, I call the death wish stage because it seems as though they have a death wish,
Yeah.
and and you're just on high
I know.
alert.
Yeah.
You know, are they gonna, let go of your hand, or put something in their mouth they're not supposed to? And
Hmm.
I remember the moment when my youngest was around 3, that where we were at a family birthday party, and I felt like suddenly I was able to finish a sentence.
Oh.
And I hadn't been able to do that for 5
Yeah.
years,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
then I realized, oh, he exuberance is now 3.
He's
He
safe.
is
Yeah.
he's
He's
well,
safer.
safer, right?
Safer. Yeah.
Not fully safe, right?
Right.
So that first stage I call the death wish stage.
Hmm.
The next stage is elementary school, which was a lot of balls. It's just like all the different sports, and bats and balls and stuff, and playgrounds and activities, and keeping them busy. A big part of that, and I even talk about that in the book, is as I call it, the three-legged stool, and
Hmm.
that I felt as though I could solve 90% of the problems in my house with one of 3 things, and
Hmm.
that was food, exercise, or sleep. And so
Yeah.
during the day, somebody would start to fall apart, and I'd be like, "Can I get you a snack? How about an apple? Maybe lunch. It's lunchtime. Look at that."
Yeah.
And then the next thing would be exercise. And for little kids, you don't have to overthink that. And I used to have the kids race around the house, and
Mm.
so I would just go sit on the steps of our house and pull out a watch and say, okay, I'm going to time you. Let's see who can, run from here to there faster. Ready, set, go. And off they would go. And that would get all that energy out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when that didn't work, if it wasn't food, if it wasn't, exercise, then it was time for a nap or to go to bed, and we'll just start over again tomorrow. Because
Yeah.
there are some days you're just not going to win.
Yeah. You're keeping it simple. That keeps it simple, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the vast majority, even when they got bigger, really 90% of the issues I felt like I could handle with one of those 3 things.
Yeah.
Um, and then when the kids got older, around middle school, high school, I call them man cubs, because they're
Yeah.
man size. Suddenly
Right.
they're looking you in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
But mentally, they're still a little kid and they just don't make very good decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
when, especially when the hormones start, coming into their body, they just become stupid. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and that took a long, that was a long period, middle school, high school, really off into young adult. Um,
Yeah.
and
That it is true because you do look at them and they look mature and
mhm,
they look big, but they're not emotionally there yet.
no,
Yeah.
no.
No, it's so true.
And I changed significantly how I parented during that time, and
Mm-hmm.
I called it being a submarine parent because I did not I worked and I was juggling a lot of things, and so I did not have the energy to be a helicopter parent. I didn't have the time. It just wasn't in my DNA. So
Yeah.
instead, I floated beneath the surface and I put up my periscope and I watched and
Yeah.
I pinged their location and I collected intelligence from the mob. And then on rare occasions, I had a full breach and I
Yeah.
came up out of nowhere and pulled
Rescued.
pulled everyone back into compliance.
Well, I love that. That sounds like a really good balance between helicopter parent and, being not caring and neglectful. So you're kind of letting them make some mistakes, fall, get back up, and then just coming in for the rescue when it's most needed.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's really, really critical for, my husband and I had a goal of letting the boys fail while they were at home with us. We didn't
Right.
want them to go off into the next stage of life and think that everything was easy peasy and they could, you know, do everything that they set their mind to, because that's just not reality. And in fact, my husband, who I call Hun in the book because
Hmm.
we live close to Baltimore, and Hun is a very Baltimore nickname. He had a philosophy that he called fail fast. And that is to, get out there, do it. If you fail, recognize that you failed, and then take a step back and try to figure out what you did wrong and correct it.
Yeah.
And really take advantage of those learning opportunities.
They say that success is based on lots of failures. So, I mean, that is very logical, good, solid advice.
And there are plenty of opportunities for failure.
Yeah.
So, and it also helps to keep your sense of humor during that
Yeah.
period.
And plus, I mean, the
Um,
kids get confidence if they fail and then they get up and they try it again and they it's a way of building confidence,
Absolutely.
allowing them to figure things out on their own.
And in a previous podcast, we talked about that with a coach,
Mhm.
about the lessons that boys and children learn from participating in group sports, and that getting back up and doing it again and becoming successful.
Mhm. So that's high school. What
Hmm.
what's after what do you have after that? Do you cover another stage in the book after that?
I do. I call it the remarkable transformation, because just when you think you're looking at your 22-year-old and you're like, they're never going to get it.
No.
They're never, it's never, it's like, come on, it's time for
Yeah.
this to click. It's time for you to get a job and become an independent person and pay your own bills and pay your own phone bill. I mean, really,
Yeah.
when they get off your car insurance and your phone bill, you
Yeah.
have
Woohoo!
really, I know, it's a windfall,
Yeah.
cash wise. And so that remarkable transformation suddenly occurs,
Yeah.
and it almost happens overnight, and you're nearly shocked
Hmm.
that it finally has occurred.
Yeah. I know. Everything seems to click all at once.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, young adults in their middle 20s, I would say,
Mhm.
for my boys, it was around somewhere between 22 and 25 is when they really sort of got their act together and figured it all out. And then as parents, we have to figure out how to navigate empty nest to go
Right.
from a disorganized house and a loud house to a much quieter house, without all this extra mess and craziness.
Yeah. Well, you cover so many different topics, and I know one thing that you do uh, talk about in your book is just the community, the support around you, which is so
Hmm.
important. And you have the book, and then we have this podcast. Can you talk a little bit about what the mob community is to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So this podcast is part of it, and the podcast is where we get to, you and I, as member as moms,
Hmm.
get to ask questions of professionals and other experienced moms for suggestions and real talk and humor and expertise on a topic.
When you were raising your kids, what did the mob community teach you?
I felt like I couldn't have survived without the mob. And
Hmm.
and and the mob isn't just, mothers of boys, it's just mothers
Parents,
in
mothers, yeah,
in
mothers
in
and
general.
fathers,
You know,
parents.
even neighbors, just
Hmm.
being able to ask people that you trust for advice and help, because it's difficult to do it alone. And
Hmm.
and I had a husband, but he was off at work and traveled a lot, so there were lots of times when I was trying to figure it out by myself, and I would be late at work and I'd have to call up a member of the mob and say, "Hey, can you pick up somebody from school and take them to your house and give them a snack?" I mean, really anything. And it brings to mind, I I have it in the as a tip for when our oldest boy Ernest went off to college. We had a party for the parents, and I went to the post office and I got priority mail boxes, and contacted, I don't know, 6 or 8 different parents that were at the same age as Ernest. And I told everyone to bring 8 of one thing. So, and we're going to make these care packages. And so one parent might have brought gummy bears, and somebody somebody else brought hot pockets, and
Oh, that's
whatever,
so fun.
all these different things. And then
Yeah.
they came to our house and we had a pot of chili and a couple of beers and drinks, and we sat around and talked. And even the men came, right? And we
Yeah.
talked about how weird it was to have our child go off,
Away. Yeah.
and we put all these gifts into
That's
the
very
box.
emotional. Your child going off to college or leaving the house for the first time is a very emotional time.
It is, and
Yeah. That's such a great idea, Susie.
it
I
was
love
really
that.
helpful.
Yeah.
And then we took a picture of everybody, and I printed it
Mm.
out and said, "Love, from your community," and we stuck it in the care packages, and we sent it off. And
Yeah.
the kids were so receptive, and they
Mm.
knew that this bigger, larger group of humans, not just their parents, was out there, their friends, their friends' parents too, and that
Yeah.
we were all supportive of them, and go do it, we believe you, get it done.
Yeah. I love that idea. I was friends with you back then. I don't know why you didn't
You
tell me about that.
didn't live closer.
I love it. I know when we do our podcast, I you always ask our guest what their mantra is. So I'm feeling like I should ask you that. Do you have a mantra as it relates to the mob community?
I do, and we actually say it at the end of each podcast, and that is be kind to yourself. And I truly mean that. And that was one of my regular responses in texting with mob members is I think as mothers we're really hard on ourselves, and we have to remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
Don't treat yourself worse than you would a friend. Yeah. So be kind to yourself would be the motto.
It's something that you just have to keep practicing because for some reason it's hard. I don't know why it's so hard, but it's like a practice. So
I would like, before we wrap this up, to truly ask everybody for their participation. So it makes a difference. We want to create a community, and you can go to mothersofboys.life is the website and sign up for the mailing list. I would also appreciate it if you would follow all of the social media sites, which is Facebook and Instagram, and YouTube are the primary sites. The podcast is available on all the different podcast platforms, so you can follow that as well. And one of the things that will help the most is to review the book if you've read it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Goodreads. Just a sentence or two.